hey, I'm Sarah Holbrook. I'm the executive director of the Pinhead Institute here in Telluride, Colorado, and the lucky interviewer of the mayor of Telluride.
Hi, Sarah.
Sean, how the heck are you?
I'm great. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking your time to do this.
Oh, I'm always happy to be here and talking with you about Telluride. So it's kind of what we call off-season around here.
It is
Where you
indeed.
can walk down the middle of Main Street and not get hit by a car.
Yeah, I was biking home from the east end to the west end last night,
Yeah.
and there was not a soul. It was
Not
like
a soul.
9:15 at night,
Yeah.
and it just felt like some sort of like quiet, other world
Yeah.
stillness.
Yes,
But,
exactly. Do you
yeah.
like it that way?
I think we need balance, so some of this is good to sort of counteract some of the frenetic, July
To be
4th
busy
type
all
of
the time.
experiences we all
Bring
have.
on July 4th every day for me.
Well,
Yeah.
everything in moderation, I guess, is probably the best way to go about
I
it.
suppose that's right. Yeah. So did you get away for any part of this little break?
I did. I went down to Houston for a wedding. Otherwise, it's just been pretty low key.
Nose to the grindstone.
Well, there's always a lot of stuff to catch up on. So,
Yeah.
and certainly if you went to our town council meeting yesterday, you saw that we covered a number of topics.
Yeah.
Things that we try just to tee up as future talking points and to sort of get a little bit more precision and guidance from town council
Yeah.
as to how they want to proceed on public art, how they want to proceed on parking permits, how they want to proceed on things like climate change initiatives. And so these sort of things, we try to use our off-season meetings to not necessarily make a lot of binding decisions,
Right.
but really to get people's input. And now that people are sort of more reflective and have a little bit more time for pause, to figure out these are weighty issues that we need to take up in the on-season again.
Right.
And so we kind of started teeing up talking points yesterday on various topics.
Yeah, so I was there for the climate part of it that Greg Clifton ran, and that was very interesting. So do you want to summarize a little bit about the headlines from that?
Sure. I mean, I guess as we all know, we have a local climate action presence. We have a statewide sort of initiative, or there are various state initiatives that we take part in, and then there's also federal. Obviously, federal today seems to getting less traction,
Yeah.
and so it really causes us to sort of look inward and say, well, where can we make the greatest impact? And that's really what's within our control and within our borders here in the town.
Right.
So part of the discussion was the fact that for the last few years, the town has been participating in the Mountain Pact, which is a lot of communities of our nature in the West that have a lobbying presence in Washington, D.C. They had some success with lobbying the Obama administration for various things, and they're having maybe less success now with our new Interior Secretary and the Trump administration, but our focus then shifts more to our statewide initiatives and local action.
Right.
So on the statewide level, we've also been a member of the Colorado Communities for Climate Action for the past about year and a half, 2 years as well. That's an initiative that really also includes mostly towns of our nature, although actually some larger communities are part of that too. And that too is more of a statewide lobbying focus. So
Right.
there are obviously our legislatures in session for a limited period, and so those lobbyists are hard at work at this point, and they're taking advantage of all the opportunities within the last week or so of our legislative session to push more initiatives. Then on the local level, actually the mayor of Aspen, Steve Skadron, attended the Paris Climate Summit, I think 2 years ago now
Right.
almost, and he came back inspired to try to create what they call a compact for Colorado. Well, first they started calling it the Compact for Colorado Mayors. Then they decided, let's call it the Compact for Colorado
Sure.
and make it a little broader and involve more elected officials, not just mayors of various towns.
And is that the
So-
deadline that's coming up May 8th? Is that what you were discussing in the council meeting?
Actually, there is a meeting in Aspen that's May 18th and
Oh,
19th
18th
for
and
the
19th,
Colorado Compact.
Okay.
And so Councilperson Brown from Telluride, hopefully our town manager Greg Clifton and I will be attending.
Oh, great.
And so
Yeah.
the takeaways there, and really why we were trying to discuss this is, Telluride has a history since, well, decades of trying to do things on the climate spectrum. And we've had limited success, but it's important that we actually set measurable goals and that we make progress toward those. So the former sort of leadership in our community back in 2006 in our master plan, we decided that we needed to have more of an aggressive climate carbon reduction sort of initiative. So we took a 2005 benchmark and we decided we would measure in 2010 and in 2015
Right.
and figure out where we are with respect to carbon output per that 2005 level.
Sure.
So the good news is that the town itself, the town's energy consumption has basically been reduced 22% in terms of carbon output since 2005.
Okay.
So in the past 11 years or whatever
Yeah,
it's been.
better than
it's
going
been-
up.
Yes,
Yeah, going down
and
20%.
but we can always do more.
Right.
And frankly, as Councilperson Brown noted in the meeting yesterday, that the town's consumption of energy is a small piece of the pie.
Right.
But really, over 90% of the rest of the energy use in our town is really people like you and me.
Right,
and what we
exactly. And do
choose
we
to
leave
do
our
at
lights
home.
on? Do we
Do we
heat
take
our
our
sidewalks?
car from one end of the
yeah,
town, or do we take our
exactly.
bike? Do
Yeah.
we walk? Do we, try to carpool if we're all going to go to Durango or
Sure.
go to
Try to walk
Montrose
to
or
school
something?
rather than driving, all that stuff.
That's
Yeah.
been a terrific initiative that I'm pleased to say we don't get credit for that, but the community has really gotten behind. So that's an excellent thing too.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking obviously with Mountain Film challenging all of the visitors to Telluride over Memorial Day weekend as well as locals
Yeah.
to figure out what more we can do, and we live in a different sort of day and age, and we have to recognize that.
Yeah, so one of the kind of cool things about what Mountain Film is doing with their New Normal initiative, and they're working with the town and they're working with the citizens, is if you go on their website to buy a pass, you then, once you've bought that pass, are directed to their offset program, where you can buy an offset that's created by the Pinhead Climate Institute.
Excellent. And
Yeah.
that's actually a similar sort of strategy that the Paris Climate Conference did, where the attendees offset their carbon footprints
Yeah.
through the same sort of mechanism. So
Sure, and the
that's
great
great
thing
that we
about our
have that
mechanism
locally.
is it's local. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's a Colorado-based offset program, which we're really proud of. And we're going to be working with your team to help them do the analytics in advance of the May 18th, 19th
And that's
meetings.
really there's where May 8th comes up, or our May 9th meeting would be the next meeting. That really will be a time for the 7 members of town council to say, okay, we had committed back in 2010, 2015 to reduce our output by 20%. Well, we've exceeded that now small 2% margin, but how much more can we do? Should
Yeah.
we be committing to 30%? Should we be trying to get to 40%?
Yeah.
What can we do, and how can we also inspire and work with other organizations locally that want to help the whole community get the carbon output reduced significantly if possible?
Yeah, so that was a good part of the meeting
And
yesterday.
we do appreciate, the Pinhead,
Yeah.
what did you call it? It's not just Pinhead Institute, it's
Well, now it's the Pinhead
Climate.
Climate Institute is one of the initiatives within Pinhead Institute. Yeah, and we're
Okay.
the ones that won the $50,000 innovation grant.
From the Telluride
Yeah,
Foundation,
exactly,
yeah.
from the Telluride Foundation, yeah.
And you're putting it to
exactly.
good use, partly by helping us then
Right, exactly,
measure.
exactly.
And if we don't all use the same metrics, we really don't get the same sort of results.
Yeah, and here's
so-
the thing, the numbers are your friend, right? Science is your friend.
True.
But sometimes you don't have the people, available with the time that they need to actually do the analytics. They're willing, they're able, they're smart, but there's just not enough hours in the day. But we can bring on experts to help you with that.
Well, we appreciate that, and certainly we all have to be speaking the same language.
Yeah.
It reminds me of actually when I lived in New York City, there was an opportunity to buy clean power or clean generated power from a particular producer. Well, soon after I learned about that initiative from Con Ed, I actually represented a purchaser that ended up buying that company. So I got to know what was going on at that level. It was a company in New Jersey. And they frankly, we're using sort of green tags to sort of convince you and I that if we let Con Ed bill us a little bit more, that we were actually doing a good thing. Well, they were basically telling us, oh, this is just sort of a way for us to make 8% more profit and make you feel
no.
better.
Oh,
So we want to
no.
make sure that not only is the,
Yeah, no
are the
greenwashing.
data,
Yeah.
being objectively analyzed, and we all sort of we compare ourselves apples to apples, but that we also don't engage in sort of the smoke and mirrors type of
Yes.
stuff, that we have real measurable reduction.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Oh, that's
so we're on our
exciting.
way, and we'll
Yeah.
continue to do that year in,
Yeah.
year out. But
Yeah, so we'll-
climate was one of our
Yeah, so we'll visit again after the May 8th and see what's
Perfect.
going on there. But talk to us about public art, because I know we've had conversations before. Almost a year ago now, that big mural went up on the side of the Elenoff building next to
Yep.
Ghost Town. And I guess that made us all aware as a town that we didn't have a public art policy in place. And so I guess yesterday's meeting was a little bit about that as well.
It's one of those topics that you would think, you scratch your head and say, well, it seems like this is a no-brainer. They should have a policy. There should already be something in place.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like, based on a little bit of research that was done, that our prior town councils had considered enacting regulations way back in 15 years ago, and it seemed like those initiatives sort of petered out, and we're at another point on the timeline where it's really time for us to create something, because frankly you can really put these things in 4 buckets. You've got public art, so publicly owned art on public property, so in our town park, in our valley floor, in our pocket parks. You have publicly owned art on private property, possibly. You have, or publicly displayed art on private property. Then you have public art owned by us. And so you basically just need to make a distinction. What can the town actually govern? And one of the things that surfaced during yesterday's meeting, it's actually to the credit of Councilperson Young, she started off by saying, I'm really concerned because this is this site is a privately owned condominium building. The HOA there has said, we have no problem with that. So the owners in the building are fine with the installation. And frankly, other than the fact that it's kind of boldly visible from Main Street, the town, in my opinion, really doesn't have a leg to stand on.
Yeah.
We really shouldn't be regulating that.
Right.
Because that's private
Yeah.
property, and it's privately done, installation. So, but that Mountain Film organization was kind enough last year and again this year to basically, as a courtesy and a respectful measure to the town, say, hey,
Right, to seek approval.
we would like your approval. And so we don't really have a mechanism yet for approving that. Last year we used this tool called a temporary use permit that allowed them to have a 180-day period where they could display, then they could come back and ask for another 180-day extension.
Right.
And basically that 360-day period is now expiring in a few days here. But we were happy to grant that last year, but it really did, point up the fact that we needed to get parts of the art community engaged in this dialogue instead of just elected officials.
Right.
So informally, Drew Ludwig and other arts leaders, Kate Jones and
Yeah,
Judy Cohen,
I saw Judy
and
from AHA
Colin
there, and
Sullivan,
Kate Jones, yeah, exactly.
Those folks who are part of our, more marquee headliner arts organizations decided to try to get together and start meeting informally as of about a year ago.
Nice.
And so what we're hoping to do is tap into that knowledge base. And so not only would we like them to help us set parameters like what's a reasonable duration for an installation, where should it occur if it's on public land, where is an appropriate part of a pocket park or an appropriate part of town park or an appropriate part of the valley floor perhaps to put such a thing, and then actually let a group that's far more skilled and knowledgeable about art, so a curatorial group, come in on a project by project or piece by piece basis and say yes or no, and if yes, here's the duration for the installation. So, and I really think that if we do this, this will also message outward, and we'll have other artists from other communities and other parts of the country that will want to come and display art here, we hope. So, and clearly the new proposed mural is something that sort of takes up the stature of the artist up a few notches, and so I think we'll get a lot of attention from that too. So I think it can be a real win-win. You know, some people get worked up about this topic, but frankly, art is meant to be,
it's meant to get us
sort of
worked up, right?
pacifying people, and yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's supposed
meant
to
to
be
make us
provocative
think, right?
and thought-provoking. You're right. So I think this really, the takeaway is our planning department will go ahead and engage with some of these larger arts community members and say, hey, we'd like to set up an ad hoc committee. We'd like you guys taking turns in terms of being members. And if one of your organizations is perhaps proposing something, then you shouldn't be voting on it. So there'll be another alternate to come and vote and determine what the appropriate approval would be. But I think that within 180 days, we should find ourselves in a position now where we have the people who really have the knowledge and have the skill to do
Right,
this.
to have some
in charge of
authority
it.
over
Yep.
making sure it either happens or doesn't happen accordingly.
Precisely.
Oh, that's great.
So, and maybe
Yeah.
we'll clarify a little bit better. Our town attorney is actually out on leave at the moment for a medical surgical procedure that he just had. So when he's back, I think we also need to clarify really where's the border of the town council's authority in terms of granting or denying approval for example, the mural at that location.
Right,
So we
right.
need to just differentiate the fact that there's probably a limit there is a limit to what we're allowed to regulate, and it's probably our purview is more limited to art on public property. So
Yeah.
and we'll get that covered, and we'll have a committee then at long last that will
Right.
be able to make those kind of decisions and actually drive that conversation further,
Yeah.
and hopefully
Aside from
attract
this
more.
new has there been public art out and about recently in the last 10 years? I can't even think of any.
I'm not aware of new installations. There's clearly the lady by the bus stop, the young woman.
Oh, right,
That is actually, I think someone donated that to the town.
Sure.
So that's public art. That's been there for quite a while. There have also there's the bear that's along the river trail that's privately owned,
yeah.
but it's on town land.
Ah, okay.
So in effect, that's probably something that the owner might want to pull back and put on his or her property, or donate it to the town.
Right.
But anyway, it's sitting on our property at the moment. We really haven't had that conversation yet.
Yeah.
But other than that, you're right.
Yeah.
We don't have enough of it.
Yeah.
And I know with the new AHA School proposed location at the SMPA lot there at the Four Corners,
Yeah.
that the AHA School has expressed a great interest in trying to have revolving sort of art installations on the building.
Oh, nice.
So hopefully this will be sort of another, the time's right to have
Yeah.
this conversation, and we'll get more public art,
Yeah.
not just in that location, but hopefully in other locations.
Yeah.
I've actually had the chance to meet a couple. There was a gentleman here from New York. He's the head of the Swiss Institute there that does a lot of cutting-edge contemporary art for mid-career artists.
Oh, neat.
I had a chance to have a coffee with him a couple weeks back, and he indicated that he'll be back this summer. He's studying the prospect of maybe doing an artist in residence program here in Telluride, and using some of his benefactors' homes as sort of places to lodge an
Sure,
artist.
yeah.
And maybe out of that initiative, we could get more public art as well, that they would hopefully, through their 6 to 8 week creative stay here in Telluride,
Yeah.
perhaps produce something that could be displayed on a longer term basis here.
Yeah.
So I think the more of that sort of interaction we have, the better.
Yeah.
And so things like that should come our way, and we should just be prepared and ready and open and receptive for it.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. What else was going on at the town council
We
meeting?
touched on parking.
Uh-huh.
Parking certainly over here on the west end where the school is located, and also on the east end. I was having dinner, like I said, last night over on the east end, and some neighbors over there were saying, we don't have a permit system over here either. They don't have a zone over there. So it's kind of one of these arguments when you step back and you think about it. We need to treat people who are similarly situated in similar fashion. So if you're living on the east end and I'm living on the west end, but I don't happen to live in a zone where I live and you don't live in a zone where you live, but there's a whole group of people in the middle who live in these parking zones, it's really not fair to us.
Right.
So we really ought to have a system whereby all the full-time residents have some sort of access to zone parking, and that you do restrict parking around our residential areas, both east and west, to 2 hours. And if you don't have a zone permit, then you're not allowed to stay longer than 2 hours in one location. So we're going to take that up. Parking is obviously a chronic problem, but in recent years with greater numbers of visitors, it's become more acute, and we have people who are actually, I didn't even realize this, some of the neighbors were explaining that some of the lots over by the cemetery are used for RVs to camp during some of the festivals, and that doesn't seem quite, what that property was intended for either. So I think we need to sort of re-examine where we have residential parking, where we allow things like RVs and commercial vehicles to park, as well as how we maybe better regulate car traffic at peak times in the town. So that sort of teed up some talking points that we'll revisit. The county, of course, has received $1.5 million for paving the intercept parking lot out at Lawson Hill.
Oh, okay.
So hopefully within a few months that process will start too. So it may be overly optimistic, but as we start increasing the San Miguel Authority for Regional Transit services to Lawson Hill, there may be some incentive for people to leave cars there on that newly paved lot and then take the goose into town.
Right. Now, normally I save my questions from the community till the end, but this brings up
Okay,
one that
you're
came
welcome.
up a few days ago. Does Telluride ever think of making this a pedestrian-only area and leaving all cars, say, over at the end of the spur?
I've never heard anybody make a formal proposal to do that. Frankly, it seems to me like we need to, everything's a balance, but we probably could, frankly, use a few more barricades during the festival seasons in order to limit car traffic into town. We don't want to be a gated community, and we don't really want to discourage people from coming, day tripping and whatnot, and visiting us that way, because that's an important economic driver for us too.
But why not just leave the cars there and have a bunch of trolleys running people in and out?
Well, it's a
trains.
possibility. I know I had heard actually that years and years ago somebody proposed a train on the valley floor.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's feasible from a cost point of view or whether or not the Open Space Commission would be very fond of that idea at this point. But certainly to the degree that we can utilize public transportation along the spur is a great idea, and we should encourage it. But unless and until we have sufficient parking out there, it's one of these things where it's going to be, we need to get our act together and get more parking.
Right, and so you're
first.
saying that the county has a new grant for $1
They have a
million?
new grant to pave what is now a gravel lot behind the Conoco station.
Oh, nice.
So they got $1.5 million from the state, and so they are actually going to work in conjunction with the San Miguel Authority for Regional Transit to complete that project in the coming year.
Got it.
So that'll be good.
Let's talk about money now, since we're
Yeah.
mentioning millions of dollars here. What's the sales tax? What's the real estate transfer tax looking
Actually,
like?
the picture is a little rosier than I expected. We'll start with the sales tax. Our numbers are through February because the March sales taxes will be due tomorrow, which would be April 20th. So we have data that shows that basically, as is the long-term trend line, we are at 5.5% ahead of where we were in the aggregate through January and February on sales tax. Real estate transfer tax is quite a different, sort of more volatile story.
Right,
We were
depending
way
on
down
what's
in January,
available,
we
yeah.
were up a bit in February, and in March it was gangbusters.
Woo!
So we are up 30%.
Wow.
Over where we were at the end of March last year. So through March of 2017, we're basically $300,000 ahead of where we had been at the end of March of 2016.
Wow, and
So
2016 was a really good year, I think, right?
it was.
Yeah.
2016 was a record year.
Right.
We raised approximately $6 million through our real estate transfer tax then. So we are now at about $1.2 million through the first 3 months.
So remind me, where does the sales tax go, get spent around town versus where does the real estate transfer tax get spent?
Sure. The sales tax, well, as we know, our open space rules require that we take 20% of our sales tax receipts, 20% of our real estate transfer tax receipts, lockbox them and use them for servicing the debt that we use to acquire the valley floor,
Got it.
as well as maintaining the valley floor and other open space, as well as potentially buying more open space wherever we might do that,
Right.
Bear Creek or wherever else. So the net amount, the remainder amount then, on sales tax, that's put into our general fund. And our general fund is used to pay salaries, it's used to provide services, and it's basically to keep the lights on in town, or
Got it.
town buildings. The real estate transfer tax, that money is basically saved and used for capital projects. So, for example, you might have noticed that we're tearing up Mahoney Drive, or that we're
Yes.
doing, we're putting in a new sidewalk next to Boot Doctors on Gus's Way down by the gondola.
Okay.
And we've been doing some other smaller infrastructure. We put a concrete pad out by the Rotary to ease the transition from the Rotary onto the paved surface of the spur. So those sort of things come out of the capital budget.
Okay.
And those sort of things are then are funded by real estate transfer
Which
tax.
is a little bit more volatile, so if you don't get the money in, then you don't pave it this year, you pave it next year or something
Right,
like that.
and this is a function of, I don't think maybe going back a decade or so, we didn't used to segregate revenue that way, and we just sort of found ourselves occasionally in a situation where we were like, uh-oh, one revenue stream or the other was way down, and we really needed to teach ourselves to live on our reliable revenue source, which is the sales tax,
Right.
and basically just use our more volatile and less reliable real estate transfer tax as our capital improvement
Right.
budget, where we can put off a project for a few years if necessary, if we find that we don't have money at a given point in time, or that we want to be careful.
Right. Now, one of the big projects that we were talking about just last month that was going to be starting is it the Virginia Placer project?
Right, the Virginia
let's
Placer
talk
is
about
actually
that.
underway. They're driving pilings as we speak. That project will hopefully be finished in approximately 12 months.
Wow.
So spring of 2018 would be the time to look for people
And
to be able to start moving
how
in.
many units, beds, families?
There is a boarding house with 46 beds.
Got it.
There are 12 two-bedroom apartments. There are 3 studio apartments, and there are 3 tiny homes.
Okay, got
So you'll have approximately 100 people
Uh-huh.
that'll be housed within all those buildings.
it. Okay.
But it's
Yeah.
it's progress, and obviously it's going to be nice to see something come out of the ground, and we'll have actually housing for another 5% of our community at the end of the day.
Wow, yeah, that's a
So-
big number. So on with the questions from the community,
Sure.
because we're talking about real estate now. Someone was asking, what do you think of the new trend where upper floor, what was commercial spaces on Main Street are now turning into residential spaces? Have you heard that? Is that a concern of yours? What's the commercial residential balance here, and how do you strike that?
This has been another one of those perennial topics where people study the matter. They try to draw some sort of a bright line distinction to say if we're not at least X% commercial and Y% the remainder residential, we're going to have problems. Frankly, there's really not a magic number. The numbers that people tend to throw out are 30-35% residential should be the limit, and then there should be about 2/3 commercial in the downtown core. That doesn't always guarantee that the residential won't disproportionately and negatively impact the commercial. I speak from experience. The building where Arroyo was located,
Oh, yeah.
even though there were only 5 residential apartments on the upper floor, and they are actually less than 30% of the entire voting shares of that
Sure.
condominium, those residential owners wreaked havoc and basically rode roughshod over the commercial activities downstairs.
Right.
So having sort of a hard and fast number is really, although it's maybe an approximate way to reach some sort of balance or make sure that there's not a disproportionate influence. It's pretty squishy. I don't really know if you can really find a number that's going to work in all locations. Certainly, we have to step back and say, look, we want the downtown core to remain commercial, and we want it to be a commercially viable place. We don't want it to be dark condominiums at night. We don't want there to be blocks of town where you just don't have any activity, because you've got to have vitality. And even businesses that close at 5, no offense to those businesses, but we need businesses that are open in the evenings too.
Right.
That means more bars and restaurants.
Yeah.
And so really we should be encouraging that sort of a scene for our retail component down there. But I don't know, if you can use the land use code to effectively achieve that. Now, I tend to not favor allowing people to, bundle a bunch of second floor office units and make them residential. But in some ways the market will ultimately probably get around or buy the whole building and tear it down, and then you'll be stuck with, well, how do we develop, what are the rules today? So it's a moving target, but it's certainly a worthy goal to try to limit residential in the downtown core. Or if you're going to have residential, there's an interesting model in Whistler. The town of Whistler, they have residential. They actually required a minimum of, I think, 40% residential downtown, and they require that to be rented short term.
So nobody can
they
get too
want
up in arms
vitality.
about what's going on.
They don't want owners who are just absentee, who pop in for a week or two every year. They require them to be in rental pools, even though they're privately owned. So in Canada, they have a little bit more heavy-handed government than we do.
Right, exactly,
but
which sometimes
frankly,
works in their favor.
There is, even if you're going to have residential in the downtown core, it does not necessarily mean that it's going to kill the vitality or kill the vibrancy.
Depending on how it's set up.
Really, you want short-term hotbeds downtown too, if you're going to the degree that you have residential downtown.
We are in the hot seat right now. We are running out of time. What have I not asked you about that you would like to chat about before we wrap it up?
I don't know. Do you have any more community questions?
No,
There's
that was
really
pretty much
nothing,
it. Yeah, exactly.
As you mentioned at the top of the hour, it's off season. We really have, this is a point where we're supposed to just sort of be reflecting. If there's people want, anything people want considered, please email me at smurphy@telluride-co.gov or any of your other town council members, and expect us to go ahead and respond to you and maybe take it up at a work session. But stay tuned for other things. We'll have the leash issue will come back in the summer. We'll have we'll drill down more on parking. We'll give updates on environmental climate action, and we'll start setting some measurable goals, and then we can hold us accountable in the coming year and 2 and 3 left. What it is.
Exactly, and we'll help you out with that. And if you're watching this before Saturday, April 22nd, please turn out for the March for Science, Saturday between 11 and 1 at the Elks Park.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Sarah. It's a
Awesome.
pleasure as always. I appreciate
Always
the
so
opportunity
fun.
to talk to you. Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.